right. Okay. So, welcome everyone to session 8 of Introduction to Buddhist Meditation and Philosophy. We are incredibly fortunate to have Venerable Lecton with us, who who's been a supporter of our center and offering these courses and teachings. We're really grateful for that. Venerable Lecton was born and raised in the Boston area of the United States, and he studied religious studies and theater and also has a master's in divinity. He was ordained with His Holiness in 2012, and since then has been living in Bailakuppe pursuing his Geshe studies at Seraje Monastic University. And that's about it. Yeah. Please keep your cameras on so that the class is more engaging, especially now that it's a smaller group. Let's keep our cameras on. Over to you, Venerable Lecton. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you for joining me this morning. I'm sorry I can't be there in person this weekend. Next weekend will be the final weekend in this course, and I will be there in person next week. So hopefully we'll get to see each other in person, and that's exciting. So as we begin today, so this is the second to last session in our Introduction to Buddhist Philosophy and Meditation. Let us first take a moment to create, let's say, a sacred space. I know we're not in the center, we're not at a temple, but we're at home, maybe in our living rooms or our bedrooms or somewhere. But let's take a moment to separate ourselves from the everyday worldly experience wherever we are and put ourselves in a space that is focused on exploring Dharma and is focused on exploring our minds. So let the everyday kind of wash away. And now let's set a strong intention that the reason we have come together today is to study the Dharma. And by studying the Dharma, learn about ourselves, learn about our own minds. But that is not for our own benefit alone that we do this. We may experience some joy, some contentment, some relaxation as a result of our study and our practice. But the goal of our study and our practice is to become a Buddha so that we might be of benefit to all sentient beings. So let's set this strong motivation that our goal is to learn about ourselves so we are more able to help others. So we are able to be of greater service to others. And with this in mind, we'll begin with a few prayers to kind of get our minds settled. So we'll begin with refuge and bodhicitta prayer. We'll do 3 times in Tibetan and then once in English. And then the remainder of these prayers we'll do in English. And feel free to recite them along with me. I know at the center, some people are hesitant to recite prayers aloud, but there really is power to engage, putting voice to the prayers. It helps focus your mind on praying and on making the meaning more relevant to your heart. And so now that you're at home and your microphones can be muted, maybe more people will recite aloud with me. Sangye churan soki chonam la janchu bardu dagni kyabsu chi dagi jinso gi pesonam gi drola pinche sangye dru par shok sangye churan soki chonam la janchu bardu dagni kyabsu chi dagi jinso gi pesonam gi drola pinche sangye dru par shok Sangye chiran soki chonam la janchu bardu dagni kyabsu chi dagi jinsogi pe sonam gi drola pinche sangye dru parshok. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Reverently I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginning this time, and rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until the end of cyclic existence and turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of all others to the great enlightenment. We'll offer a short mandala offering, both as a request for the teaching and a request for the blessings of all the Buddhas. And this ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Hidam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niyatayami. Let's continue with praise to Shakyamuni Buddha. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. When, O supreme amongst humans, you were born on this earth, you paced out 7 strides and then said, I am supreme in this world. To you who are wise then I prostrate. With pure bodies, form supremely pure, wisdom ocean like a golden mountain, fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner of the best, Lord, to you I prostrate. With the supreme signs, face like spotless moon, color like gold, to you I prostrate. Dust free like you, the 3 worlds are not. Incomparably wise one, to you I prostrate. The Savior having great compassion, the Founder having all understanding, the field of merit with qualities like a vast ocean, to you, the one gone to thusness, I prostrate. The purity that frees one from attachment, the virtue that frees one from the lower realms, the one path, the sublime pure reality, to the Dharma that pacifies, I prostrate. Those who are liberated and who also show the path to liberation, the holy field qualified with realizations who are devoted to the moral precepts, to you, the sublime community intending virtue, I prostrate. Homage to the Supreme Buddha, homage to the Dharma refuge, homage to the great Sangha, to all 3, ever devout homage. To all worthy of respect, bowing with bodies as many as all realms, atoms, in all aspects, with supreme faith I pay homage. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions. Perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a visual aberration, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew or a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud, see conditioned things as such. Through these merits may sentient beings attain the rank of all-seeing, subdue the four faults, and be delivered from samsara's ocean, perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. Thank you for that. So we begin with prayers to help set our motivation and to help align our mind with the Dharma that we are about to study together and discuss. So even when you're doing your daily practice, even if it's just a simple daily practice of calm abiding meditation, it's good to at least begin that with that refuge prayer, that first verse in the beginning. That helps set your motivation, and it helps create a space around you, to make your practice more powerful in that way. So last week was a heavy week for those that joined us or those that are watching along online, either live or the recordings. Last week, we discussed how to realize the emptiness of persons, right? So when we think of the nature of reality, the most profound philosophy that the Buddha taught, it is emptiness, that nothing exists inherently, that all phenomena exist, but it doesn't exist the way we perceive it to exist, which is that we perceive it to exist inherently. We perceive it to exist by means of its own nature, and it doesn't exist that way. And so understanding that is understanding emptiness, so-called, the selflessness of persons and the selflessness of phenomena. And so last week we dedicated almost the whole session to the logic that is used to help convince ourselves of the selflessness of of persons, rather. How we use that logic step by step, and we use the analysis of that logic and bring it into our meditation to try to have some understanding of selflessness of persons, of emptiness. And we talked a little bit about how that type of meditation is useful in our everyday life, even though emptiness seems like such a profound philosophy, disconnected from how we live our everyday life. And we're going to talk a little bit more about integrating that into our practice probably next week. But where I wanted to go this week is a little bit different. This week, I wanted to talk about refuge. And that is a strange order of events, right? Usually, refuge is one of the first things that you learn about. And this course, we've been through 8 weeks so far. It's 9 weeks long. So it's strange to end on refuge, right? But part of the structure of this course, for anyone that has followed along all of the sessions, is that we are introducing the ideas of Buddhist philosophy and of Buddhist meditation. And refuge is a commitment, right? Refuge comes from confidence. And as a result of that, we wanted to structure the classes in such a way that people understood the content, and then they understood how that content, or the idea of the Dharma, how that is supposed to be a safe haven, how that becomes a refuge. So that's why refuge is here closer to the end. So, we talk about any Dharma center you go to is going to talk about refuge. You're going to hear this a lot. I go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. These are the three jewels, the triple gem, the three jewels of refuge. And so we first have to think of, what do we mean when we talk about refuge? And we can think in a worldly sense, what does the word refuge mean, right? And refuge is safety. We seek refuge in places when we need to feel comforted and protected and safe, right? That's what we mean by refuge. Whether it is refuge from a storm, or refuge from invasive, harmful thoughts, or refuge from someone who wants to harm us, refuge, when we seek it, is safety. And it can look different ways in a worldly sense, right? Depending on what worldly obstacle or foe we are trying to find safety from. Often, what we seek out as refuge isn't real refuge, right? That's the problem. We'll get to that a little bit later. But so, according to Buddhism, what we really should be seeking refuge from is refuge from samsara, from suffering entirely. And so, because of that, when we talk about refuge, there's only 3 authentic sources of refuge, and that is the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And so those are the only authentic sources of refuge. And so, first off, when we think of refuge, we have to realize there's 2 types of refuge, right? We say there's causal refuge and there's resultant refuge. And that's worthwhile to know. Causal refuge is the external Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, right? So specifically, when we talk about the Buddha jewel, we're talking about Shakyamuni Buddha, but from a tantric perspective, we can think of any of the Buddhas we consider as the Buddha jewel. And then the Dharma are the teachings that Shakyamuni Buddha taught in this world, both Sutra and Tantra teachings, all of them combined. That is the Dharma. And the Sangha are the beings who have realized the nature of reality, who have had direct realizations of emptiness. That's what we mean by the Sangha jewel. We use the term Sangha, in Sanskrit, Sangha just means coming together, right? The verbal root is ga with the prefix sum, which means to kind of come together, or to collect together, a collection in this way. So we use the word Sangha just to mean any group of monks and nuns. And then we also use it more colloquially to mean like the Dharma siblings who gather together at any given Dharma center like this. We use the word Sangha very loosely in that way. But here, when we're talking about the Sangha jewel, what we mean is those beings who have realized the nature of reality, who have had direct realizations about emptiness. So they're called Arya beings or noble beings. So these are all the causal refuge. And they're causal, we use that term because by taking refuge in them, that is what causes us to enter into the path of the Dharma. That is what causes us to become Buddhas ourselves, eventually. So they serve as a cause in that way. Now, the resultant refuge is the Buddha and the Dharma and the Sangha that exist within our own continuum that we have not yet realized. So the future Buddha that I will become as a result of my practice is the resultant Buddha jewel. And the future Dharma that I will explain and teach when I have become a Buddha is the future Dharma jewel, or the resultant Dharma jewel. And the future nature of the path, the truth of the path and the truth of cessation that will be existing within my continuum when I become an Arya being, that is the resultant Sangha jewel. So they don't exist at this time, but what they exist as is the potentiality for three authentic jewels that exist within every single sentient being. And so when we take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, we're primarily taking refuge in the external Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, the causal refuge. But at the same time, part of our mind should be taking refuge in the resultant Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha as well. And what that means is we're taking refuge in the confidence that we ourselves have the capacity to become Buddhas, and we will become Buddhas as a result of practicing this path. Right? This path leads to Buddhahood for all sentient beings. And that knowledge, taking refuge in that knowledge and that confidence is also important. So even though the actual primary objects of refuge are external, they're the causal Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, we have to remember the resultant Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha at the same time. And at least part of our mind should be taking refuge in those. So when we think about refuge, I think it's important and helpful to think about what things in our lives we take refuge in all the time without meaning to. Think of whenever you've had a difficult day, whatever it may be, what is the first thing you did to try to overcome whatever difficulties you were facing? Did you run to a spouse? Did you need to just turn on the TV and zone out? Did you go, buy a box of chocolate chip cookies? What is it that you sought refuge in? What is it when you experience obstacles or difficulties or distress that you turn to find relief from that distress? Right? And it's important to go through our lives and see what things we ran to when we experience distress or suffering. Because we're humans. That's our nature, right? We surround ourselves with samsara. We exist in samsara. So we believe that samsara is somehow going to help us. And we're taught that these are the things that are going to protect us. So it's useful to think in your life, just go through one day when you experience any sort of distress, emotional or physical. What did you turn to help relieve yourself of that distress, of that discomfort? And now, when you have a few examples in mind, think, did they actually benefit you? Now, they might have relieved your immediate distress, right? In the same way that if you're hungry, eating something, it eliminates that immediate sensation of hunger. But no worldly refuge can actually eliminate the cause of your distress. They can only allay the symptoms temporarily because they're not an authentic refuge. They're not a genuine refuge. They're temporary, right? The way we often talk about it is, and this is thinking of people who turn to worldly gods and worldly divinities, and they make offerings or sacrifices to worldly beings and worldly gods who have some sort of supernatural powers, and take them as refuge. And we say they themselves are trapped in samsara. They are samsaric beings. How can they free you from the prison of samsara if they themselves are prisoners? Right? It's impossible. So in that way, we have to look at all of these worldly objects of refuge that we impulsively turn towards and realize they will not save us from samsara. At the best, they are a temporary band-aid, right? And that's fine if we recognize them for that. If we know that right now I am overstimulated and I need to do such and such to help calm my mind in order for me to be in a healthy place where I can do deeper work, then that's great. If we're able to look at them as that way, because that means we're not accepting them as an actual refuge. We're accepting them as a temporary means to bring us to a state of being where we can turn to refuge, right? But the problem is we don't do that. The problem is we look at these worldly things and we grasp onto them as if they were going to save us, as if they were going to eliminate all of our distress and they were going to bring us happiness. That is the danger with these worldly refuge that we turn to all the time. So then once we're able to develop confidence that these worldly objects and worldly people, worldly experiences are not going to save us from samsara, then it's up to us to say, well, what do we turn to then for safety? Where do we seek out refuge if these worldly things are not going to help us? And as you said, it's the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. So why is that the case? How do those three protect us from samsara? And so the analogy that is always given is we think of the Buddha as the great physician, right? And we're the patient. So the great physician is analyzing the patient and seeing what is wrong with the patient. And that is why the Buddha taught the truth of suffering and the truth of the cause of suffering. This is the Buddha diagnosing what it means to be a samsaric being, a patient of samsara, right? Someone who is infected by samsara. So the Buddha is a physician insofar as he's diagnosing the illness. And then he's prescribing the proper medicine, which is the Dharma. So the Dharma is the medicine that we need to take in order to relieve ourselves from the sickness of samsara. And then the Sangha are like the attendants or the nurses who help us take that medicine. They show us the way to do it, they lead by example, and they give us advice along the way, right? So we think of the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha as the physician, the medicine, and the nurses, because they together are able to free us from the sickness of samsara. But if we think of these three things, we have to realize that the real object of refuge is the Dharma. Because of those three, what is the most important? The actual medicine is what's most important, right? So the Dharma jewel is the actual source of refuge. The Buddha taught the Dharma, the Buddha diagnosed our illness, and the Sangha lead by example and then make sure that we, stay on our prescription regime, right? That we don't skip any pills. But the actual medicine is what is going to cure us of the illness, and that is the Dharma. And the Dharma is not simply what the Buddha spoke and how the Buddha acted, right? But the Dharma is how we have to live our lives. We can't just listen to the Dharma, right? Or study the Dharma in text and then all of a sudden we'll be cured of samsara. We have to apply it. So the Dharma has to be something we live in our lives. And when we experience moments of distress and we turn to the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha as our first source of refuge, the more we habituate ourselves with that, we realize that is what will bring us safety. That is how we find comfort. Whenever I experience something overwhelming, instead of immediately wanting to retaliate, I say, what is it that is going to bring me happiness right now? How can I protect myself from the dangers of samsara? And it's always the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Because samsara itself is indifferent, right? Samsara is always going to be a source of suffering. That's what samsara is. This constant cycle of death and rebirth in samsara, in suffering. So we need to find a way to protect ourselves from that, and that is through our practice, and our practice has to be informed by the Dharma, which is taught by the Buddha and supported by the Sangha. But not just anyone can spout Dharma and then, as a result of that, be considered a Buddha jewel, right? Now, we often, especially in the Tibetan tradition, have strong devotion to our gurus. And so when we take someone as a guru, then they become almost a fourth source of refuge, right? We prostrate often to first the guru, then the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, because we see the guru as embodying all three, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, in our lives. So when we have that intimate connection with a teacher, then they become a living embodiment of the three jewels. But aside from that, we have to say not anyone, just because they know the Dharma well or they speak the Dharma well, is an appropriate object of refuge, right? Just because someone has an understanding and even a strong practice doesn't make them an appropriate object of refuge. What is it about the Buddha that sets the Buddha apart? And so we tend to say there are four characteristics of the Buddha that set the Buddha apart, that identify the Buddha, any Buddha, but here we're talking about Shakyamuni, but this goes for any Buddha, that sets them apart and identifies them as an appropriate object of refuge. And those four characteristics, the first one is that a Buddha has impartial compassion. No matter how sentient beings treat the Buddha's wish for them to be free from suffering and to be free from all the causes of suffering is the exact same for all of them. And in the same way, the Buddha impartially works for the benefit of all sentient beings. And so that impartiality, both in the experience of compassion and in the work for others' benefit, is important. And the way it's often taught is that if there were two sentient beings, one on either side of the Buddha, and one was massaging oil into his skin, and the other was stabbing him with a knife, his compassion to them would be the same. And his work for their benefit would be the same. Because he has perfect impartiality. When we do meditations on equanimity, this is part of the thing we are trying to realize in our life, right? That our distinction between friend, enemy, and stranger is due to circumstance only. It has no inherent quality in those other beings. And so by trying to develop a mind of equanimity, we are aligning ourselves with the impartiality of a Buddha that isn't indifference, right? It's not this mind that says nothing matters. What it is a recognition that all sentient beings deserve freedom from suffering equally, regardless of how they treat me. And the way they treat me in this life is simply due to circumstances. It's due to their own karmic delusions that are ripening in one way or another, their own imprints they've created in past lives. And then my projections onto their actions, which those projections are informed by my self-cherishing mind. So the Buddha has impartial compassion, and a Buddha has impartial work for the benefit of others. The other two qualities that makes the Buddha an worthy object of refuge is that the Buddha is free from all fears. Right? We often list out, I think, 18 different fears, but all the different fears of samsara, a Buddha is free from all of those. Because a Buddha has not only surpassed samsara and taken themselves out of samsara, but a Buddha understands the path and the means to lead others out of samsara. And that itself is the fourth characteristic, that a Buddha is not simply like an arhat who is not on the Mahayana path, but is free from samsara, like a Shravaka arhat or a Pratyeka Buddha arhat, but a Buddha also has the knowledge of how to dispel the fears of others. So that's the fourth characteristic. They themselves have no fear, and they are free from all fears, and they have the knowledge and skill of how to dispel the fears of others. So it's through the Buddha's actions and teachings that they are able to dispel our fears of samsara. We are able to be free from those fears because we see the path to Buddhahood that the Buddha shows us and teaches us, the authentic path. The word Buddha in Sanskrit, Buddha is the past passive participle of the verbal root bud, which means to awaken or to get up in some way, to open up. So Buddha is an awakened one. In Tibetan, when they translated it, they translated the term as Sangye. And Sangye comes from two terms. The word Sang means to purify, and the word Ge means to increase. A Buddha has purified every obstacle to omniscience and has increased every good quality, right? So the Buddha embodies the complete abandonment and purification of all obstacles, of all afflictions, and um, has realized infinite good qualities, increased their good qualities, Sangye. So the Tibetan etymology is slightly different than the Sanskrit. And so those are the two characteristics that we strive for. How do we abandon all of our afflicted minds, all of our obscurations, and how do we increase our good qualities, right? And in so doing, we follow the example of the Buddha. Now, it's easy to speak the words, I go for refuge to the Buddha, and it's easy to understand them, but it becomes difficult, right, to actually see these three jewels as the source of our safety. And so it's useful to think, at least traditionally, what are the causes for taking refuge? What is it that would spur us into actually taking refuge of the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha? And the first cause is often described as fear, right? And this is how Lama Zopa often talks about there being a healthy fear, that there are occasions when you have a mind of fear, but it propels you into positive action. So fear itself is a changeable mental state. It doesn't always have to be harmful, because if that fear is directed at something that is worthy of fear, and it, instead of paralyzing you, it propels you into virtuous behavior, then that's a healthy fear. So fear of the lower realms is considered the cause of refuge for the lower scope beings, right? And fear of all the sufferings of samsara is the cause of refuge for the medium scope beings. And fear of suffering in samsara, not just for ourselves, but the fear of all sentient beings suffering in samsara, that fear is cause of refuge for great scope beings. So it's fear of suffering, essentially, but it's the suffering of the lower realms, the suffering of samsara itself, which is the lower and the upper realms, and the suffering not of just oneself, but of all sentient beings. That fear is the first cause of samsara, excuse me, of going for refuge. So that is a healthy fear. And then the second cause of refuge is confidence in the triple gem, confidence in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. So you don't need both of these causes, right? But both of them work together. So you might only have one or the other, and that might be enough to really compel you to go for refuge. But having both of them, they strengthen each other, right? Because when you have fear of suffering, you need to know, where do I look to find safety from the suffering? How do I know not to look to these worldly things? So the confidence in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, which is what points you in the right direction. So you fear suffering for yourself and others, and you look at the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and due to your study, your contemplation, your meditation, your practice, your observation of your teachers, your observation of others who have been practicing this Dharma, you have confidence that there is validity to the Triple Gem. It's not a blind faith, it's a confidence born out of your experience and your observation. And that confidence, coupled with the fear of suffering, are what propel you to take refuge. Because refuge is a mind, right? We have a mind of refuge. It isn't, yes, there's a ceremony we can go through when we first become Buddhist and we take refuge formally, and we say refuge prayer all the time, right? We recite the words, but refuge itself is a mind. It's a mind that goes to refuge. And it is a mind that recognizes that the three jewels are the only authentic sources of refuge, that they are authentic sources of refuge and no authentic source of refuge exists outside of them. That is what it means to go for refuge, is to genuinely develop that mind and have that mind be present with you all the time. Now, as beginners, even if we have that genuine belief, that mind might not always be present, right? Or it might not always be manifest. And we are still going to seek out worldly refuges over and over again as we are struggling and learning our way on the path. And that is fine, right? Now, that's not going to help us out of samsara, but it's just recognizing that we're doing our best. But the more we meditate on refuge and the more we make refuge an intentional part of our practice, then that mind of refuge, the mind that realizes only the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha can save us from suffering, that mind is going to be more prominent, right? It's not going to be hiding in the shadows quite as much. It's not only going to come out when you recite the words, but it's going to be there informing everything you do. In the same way that we meditate on compassion, we meditate on bodhicitta, even if we haven't realized great compassion or bodhicitta yet, the more we meditate on them, the more we make our minds inseparable from them, the more our everyday actions are going to be informed by compassion and bodhicitta, right? Because a mind that we cultivate during meditation, it's no use if we only explore that mind in meditation. We need to apply that mind in our everyday life. Otherwise, what's the point, right? It's like doing, years of research for a dissertation and doing all the research and then not doing anything with it, right? Which, I mean, I actually know a number of people who never finished their dissertation after years in grad school. So maybe that's not the best example. I have a very good friend who's a nun who went to Harvard and is a dissertation away from having a PhD in music theory. But she just gave it all up to become a nun and devote herself to the Dharma. So maybe that's not a great example, but you understand the point, right? That if we do the work in meditation, we've built up all these resources. If we don't apply those minds outside of our meditation practice, then what's the point, right? It's it's taking all the effort to develop these great opportunities and then letting them pass us by. So we meditate on refuge, and it seems so simple. It's the first prayer we recite in the morning. It's the first prayer we recite before any teaching. So it seems so basic, but it is a foundational cornerstone that it's really important we understand what it means to have a mind of refuge. They often say there are a number of benefits to actually developing a mind of refuge. And the first benefit is, depending on how you translate it, you become a Buddhist, right? But the way that's especially expressed in Tibetan is you become an inner being. The word for Buddhist is a nanpa, an inner being. So when you have a genuine refuge, you become an inner being, which means you become the type of person who is always analyzing their mind, who is recognizing that their suffering, even if it seems to be coming from the outside, is still being mediated by their mind. That regardless of how difficult their external circumstances are, it's their mind that is um, creating suffering over and over again in this life and in future lives. So you become an inner being by authentically going for refuge, by realizing that the Buddha, that all the teachings of the Buddha, and that the community of realized beings are the only things that will save us from the suffering of samsara. And again, they save us not by, um, you know, waving their hands and doing magic spells. They save us by showing us how to save ourselves. That's the reason the Dharma is the genuine refuge. But so the first benefit of having a genuine mind for refuge is that we become an inner being. And we also say that the having refuge becomes the basis for ordination. And not just monastic ordination, but even someone who wants to take the lay vows. So the pratimoksha vows are often divided into 8. There are 8 different types of pratimoksha vows, right? There's the pratimoksha vows of a novice monk and a novice nun, of an intermediate nun, and then of a fully ordained monk and a fully ordained nun. So that's 5 sets. And then there are the one-day vows, which are a special category of vows. And then there are the pratimoksha vows, or the vows of individual liberation for lay people, both male and female lay people. And so those 5 pratimoksha vows, right, to not kill, to not steal, to not engage in sexual misconduct, to not lie, and to not take intoxicants. Those vows are an ordination, right? They're a type of ordination, we consider taking vows. And the basis for taking the pratimoksha vows of a layperson even is refuge, having a mind of refuge. And the reason that's a benefit is because, we often talk about how motivation and intention is the most important thing we have, right? Because the mental actions precede every action of body and every action of speech. So having a strong motivation is important. Vows work the same way, right? If I go through my day not killing anything, then that's great. But if I have a vow not to kill anything, then that becomes an active accumulation of merit. So the more vows we hold, the more possibilities we have of accumulating merit, the more possibilities we have of progressing farther and faster on the path. And that's why ordained Sangha are looked upon as sources of offering, because ordained Sangha who have vows in their continuum and hold those vows purely are, it's like a fast track, right? That's the purpose of vows. And so when you have a mind of refuge, then you become an appropriate vessel for vows. And in this case, that means, at least as the basis, the pratimoksha vows, the pratimoksha vows of a layperson. So Pratimoksha means individual liberation, right? So the vows of individual liberation for a layperson. Now, the next two benefits of refuge seem very simple, but they're really profound. And that when you have a mind of refuge and you've really meditated on it so that it's not something that is like hiding in the back corners of your mind, but something that you practice, then naturally your negative actions decrease and your virtuous actions increase, right? It becomes natural to lean into virtue and to avoid negativity. So it doesn't require as much effort. That mind of refuge makes it easier because you are accumulating or habituating yourself rather with the Dharma. And by doing that, your instinct is to abandon non-virtue and to adopt virtue. So when you are able to really reflect on refuge and have a genuine mind of refuge, then naturally your negative actions will decrease and your positive actions will increase. They also say that when you take refuge, you will be free of being born in the lower realms. So when you have a genuine mind of refuge, it helps eliminate any karmas you've created in the past to be born in lower realms, and it helps ensure that what karmas you have created don't ripen, especially at the moment of death, which is why having a mind of refuge is always important, because that refuge is a protection from being reborn in the lower realms. If that mind of refuge is strong in your continuum, right? If it's not just lip service, because that mind of refuge eliminates it removes the conditions that even if you have created the karmic seeds um, that would result in birth in a lower realm, that mind of refuge removes the conditions that would allow them to ripen, right? So it's really powerful in that way. It also prevents you from being harmed by external spirits. That's what they say. And it helps to ensure you accomplish your aims because that mind of refuge always points you in the right direction, right? It helps you realize that even though you're suffering and even though I don't have any expectation to become a Buddha tomorrow, I know what direction to move in to bring myself closer to Buddhahood. And so by doing that, it helps me accomplish all of my aims. And so, as I said, since our virtuous activities increase, it helps us accumulate merit. It makes the merit we accumulate intentional, not accidental, right? And it brings us closer and closer and closer to enlightenment. It's impossible to achieve enlightenment, to achieve actual freedom from samsara and Buddhahood both. It's impossible to achieve either of those without refuge. So, refuge is a cornerstone. And again, it's a little weird that we're talking about it now near the end of the series instead of at the beginning, right? I appreciate that. But the reason for that has to do with, as I said, the two causes of refuge are not simply fear of samsara, but also confidence in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. So by having the last 7 weeks to explore the teachings of the Dharma, then that allows us to develop a sense of confidence in them, right? Because when you actually go for refuge, and there is a ceremony, right? You can go through this ceremony, and often you'll receive a refuge name from your teacher. And so, for instance, when I was a freshman in college, I went for refuge. No, excuse me, when I was a sophomore in college. I started studying when I was a freshman. But when I went for refuge the first time and became Buddhist, I was given the name Tsultrim, Tsultrim Nima. And I went by that name through all of college because I wanted to be reminded every time someone spoke to me that I had made this choice. And that helped me keep my refuge, my mind of refuge, at the forefront of my mind by using that name. And when I became a monk, then I gave up my lay name and I adopted a monastic name, again from the monk who ordained me. But going for refuge, there was a ceremony I went through. But you don't have to go through that ceremony in order to actually have refuge, in order to become a Buddhist, quote unquote, right? Because refuge is a mind. So when you actually are able to develop that mind confidently and you know that the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha are authentic sources of refuge and there is no authentic source of refuge outside of them, that means you have accepted them as the triple gem as refuge, right? So that's what it means to go for refuge. So you can develop that mind. The ceremony, the ritual, is It's like icing on a cake. It's not necessary. It helps some people because it makes things feel formalized, right? That's what ritual does. Ritual gives us external tools to transform our inner lives. That's the point of ritual. But it's not necessary. Because when you actually go for refuge, that comes with some commitments and it comes with some promises, right? So there are three things that you um, promise to avoid and three things that you promise to adopt in regards to or in relation to the three jewels that you're taking refuge in. So when you take refuge in the Buddha, along with that is you avoid refuge in any other type of teacher or teaching, right? So when you take refuge in the Buddha, you recognize that the teachings the Buddha taught and are the only authentic teachings that will lead you out of samsara. Now, that doesn't mean you can't study other things. That doesn't mean you can't be interested in worldly topics or like things that you learn at university. And it also doesn't mean that you can't have friends or guides who are other religious traditions, you know. But it means that you have to recognize that they are not teaching an authentic path to Buddhahood. So they're not a source of refuge. I had a very good friend who passed away this year, but he was a bishop in the Celtic Orthodox faith. And he was as close to a bodhisattva as anyone I've ever met, really. He's quite an amazing person. When I met him, he was teaching theological French at Harvard. And my friend, a classmate of mine, was taking like the summer course because he was applying for his PhD and he needed to have an additional language. So he was taking the condensed summer course of French. And one of the texts that Bishop Paul was teaching was a text by Lama Yeshe that had been translated into French. And he was having his students translate it from French into English because he had such a profound faith, devotion to Lama Yeshe and to Lama Zopa and to His Holiness Dalai Lama. And he lived a few blocks away from the Dharma Center that I attended. That's how I met him through Harvard, but then I started visiting him when I was at the center. So I didn't have confidence in him as a refuge, right? He wasn't any source of refuge for me, but he was an incredibly spiritual person who had a great personal practice, who I felt embodied compassion in a meaningful way. And so I was able to learn a lot from him, right? Just by being in his presence. Now, I didn't accept him as an authentic teacher, right? And that would, if I had, that would have contradicted my vows of refuge. But I did realize that he was a benefit to my life. So you can have other teachers in that way, whether they be texts or topics or people, but you have to recognize that they are not an authentic source of refuge. And they're not going to save you from samsara, right? So that's what it means to avoid other types of teachers. That's what you vow to do when you generate a mind of refuge in the Buddha. And what you promise to do, so that is the proscription. And then the prescription is that when you have a mind of refuge, then you look at any representation of any Buddha, whether it be a drawing or a statue or anything else, and you treat that representation as if it were an actual Buddha, right? That's why we're very careful when we have statues and when we have paintings that we don't put them on the ground. We keep them in a respectful place. We keep them clean. If you have a statue, you keep it dusted and you treat it well because those are Buddhas in our minds. So as someone who has taken refuge, you have to have the mindset that this is a Buddha and you treat it as an actual Buddha, which is why you kind of see yourself playing with language sometimes when you see an image of the Buddha that isn't drawn so well. You don't want to say like, oh, that's an ugly Buddha, right? Because that would be very disrespectful to the Buddha. But so you say, no, that's a Buddha, but there was an unskillful artist who drew it like this. You kind of play with your language a little bit to make sure that what you're criticizing, quote unquote, isn't the Buddha in front of you, but it is just the artwork that is representing that Buddha. So that's the first commitment of taking refuge in the Buddha. You promise to avoid other teachers, or excuse me, you avoid taking refuge in other types of teachers, and you promise to recognize that every representation of a Buddha is treated like a Buddha. When you take refuge in the Dharma, right, what you promise to avoid is you avoid harming any other sentient being. That's what it means to take refuge in the Dharma. You have the promise that you will avoid harming any other sentient being. And then the prescription is that you recognize every single letter of the teaching of the Buddha, however it's written out, is like all of the teachings of the Buddha. They're not just visual representations, they're the actual spoken teachings of the Buddha. So you treat them with respect. And that's why similar Dharma material, Dharma text, we don't put it on the ground, we keep it in a clean place, right? And they even say that if we say that of the three jewels, the Dharma jewel is the actual refuge, right? The Buddha jewel is the expounder, but the actual refuge is the Dharma jewel. So if you have a Dharma text right in front of you, you wouldn't even put a statue of the Buddha on top of it because the Dharma itself is considered higher, more profound. And like a lot of people, when they have prayer books, if they aren't able to lay flat, they'll like use their mala to like weigh down a page so it doesn't blow, so it doesn't close on them. And Lama Zopa says, oh, they clearly don't understand Dharma, you know, if they're willing to put something on top of a Dharma text. The last time Lama Zopa came to Choe Khor Sum Ling, we had a Lama Chopa puja, a guru puja. And Venerable Namjong, who some of you may have met, and he's going to be coming to give a teaching in February, I think. He was the umze, he was the chant leader. And he was very nervous because he had never done all of the tunes for Lama Chopa in front of as the umze in front of Lama Zopa before. And so when you are the chant leader in front of your teacher, it can be very nerve-wracking, right? And he had his prayer book, and he had his mala on the prayer book, holding it open. And Lama Zopa, at some point, like halfway through, I think when you take a break to hand out the tzolk, Lama Zopa complimented on how beautiful his melodies were and his tune was. But he says, "Look, you clearly don't know Dharma because you're holding your book open with a mala." And so he gave a compliment and a critique in front of everyone. And of course, Venerable Namjong turned bright red and was very embarrassed. But he was just poking just a little. He said, "You're doing a very beautiful job. Your tunes are so beautiful, but you should study Dharma more." But so we treat every single word of the Dharma, of the teachings, as if they were the authentic, they were all of the teachings, right? Even a single letter becomes representative of all of the Dharma. And then the last commitment of when you take refuge in the Sangha is you have a commitment to avoid harmful friends, to avoid negative friends. And you promise to treat even a scrap of cloth, of red cloth, as if it were the robes of a holy being. So again, this is just developing a mind of respect that is recognizing that beings, and now again, not just monks and nuns, but Arya beings, beings who have realized the nature of reality, they are the ones that are able to show us the clear path to Buddhahood. And so we have to generate a mind of respect for them. And so we treat even their clothing with respect or anything that represents their clothing. So that is the overview of refuge. Now, we could talk a lot more about it, but I think for our purposes, that is a good amount. And what I thought we would do is I thought we would do our meditation today on refuge. And so instead of waiting to the end, why don't we do the meditation now? And then I have a few other topics we'll cover through the rest of the session. But now that we've just kind of got refuge fresh in our minds, let's do maybe a 20-minute or so meditation on that, and I'll talk us through that. And then we can go over the rest of the topics when we finish that. Okay? Okay. So get yourself into a comfortable position, whatever that may be. If you're sitting, let your feet be flat on the ground and not crossed at the knees or the ankles, so you feel secure on the ground, on in your base. If you are able to sit flat, like on a cushion, or sit cross-legged, then that's good as well. Whatever is a comfortable seat for you that will allow you to feel grounded and secure. Allow your hands to rest comfortably on your thighs or in the meditation mudra at your navel. Let your spine be. Visualize your spine is nice and straight. And we know the spine is not straight, that it has a curve to it, but we visualize it like a stack of coins, right? Nice and straight. That keeps our chest up and open, letting us breathe easily, but we're not pushed or puffed out in any way. We're not hunched down. We're just nice and upright. Now we let our skull follow the curve of our neck and rest. It'll be tucked slightly down, right? We're not tucking ourselves down into our chest or lifting our head up to the sky, letting it follow its natural curve. And in the same way, we relax our jaw. We let our jaw follow its own natural inclination. So it might hang open a little bit, most likely. Your lips will be slightly open. And now let your tongue rest on your hard palate behind your upper teeth. This is helpful for your breathing. It also is helpful to prevent excess saliva from accumulating in your mouth. And let your eyes stay half open, following the bridge of your nose to the space in front of you. Not focused, not pointing out any one thing or another, but not shutting out the world either. And now let your breathing fall into a natural pattern. Don't force it one way or the other. And for a few moments, we will just focus on our breathing to settle our mind before we begin the actual body of the practice. So let your awareness follow your breath as it goes in and out. And if it's helpful, you can say to yourself, breathing in and breathing out, to allow you to focus more strongly on the act of breathing. If you don't need to label it in that way, then you don't have to. That's just a tool. Your focus isn't on the label, it's on the breath itself. When you notice yourself distracted, whether from an external distraction, like a sound or a sight or a smell, or an internal distraction, a thought, a story you've started telling yourself in, just recognize that distraction. You can label it distraction, and then just let it go. Do not judge that distraction as good or bad. Do not judge yourself for having that distraction. Simply recognize it and let it go, returning your awareness to the object of your meditation, which in this moment is the breath. And now I want you to start by bringing to mind all of the fears and dangers that exist in samsara. All of the worldly obstacles that make our lives difficult. All of the things that we are afraid of that we need to find safety from. And these can be trivial things or monumental things. Whatever comes to mind, focus on these for a moment. Become aware of all of the dangers and fears there are in samsara. And once you have a recognition of these, first bring to mind the thought of what good fortune you have to have this human body and this opportunity to find some sort of refuge from these fears. So develop a strong mind of anticipatory gratitude. Yes, samsara is riddled with fears and dangers, but due to past virtuous karma, I have been born into a body and time and place where I can do something about those fears. But then with that recognize, I'm not guaranteed how long this body will last, when death will come. There's no guarantee that I won't fall to the lower realms in the future, and I have no clue when that will be. So I need to practice now and take advantage of what opportunities I have. Think of the incredible dangers and fears, not in your life, but of the lower realms, of the animal realm, which is pervaded by ignorance and fear, of the hungry ghost realm, pervaded by incredible suffering of thirst and hunger, and of a feeling, a ravenous feeling of emptiness and longing. Think of the sufferings of the hell realms that are pervaded by extreme heat or cold, physical sensations of fear that are mixed with anger and hatred so strong they're overwhelming. Think of all the terrors of those three realms and generate a strong sense of fear that you might be reborn into one of those realms. So develop a fear of the three lower realms, or contemplate a strong sense of fear of the three lower realms. Now think of the sufferings not just of the lower realms, but of the upper realms as well. Think of the sufferings as a human, or a god, or a demigod. The fact that samsara itself is uncertain, that the very nature of samsara is dissatisfaction. That in samsara you're constantly leaving a body again and again, having to take rebirth over and over again. Your status is constantly shifting from high to low, and ultimately you're traveling through this ocean of samsara alone without any permanent companions. Contemplating these and the other sufferings you know from your own life, develop a fear not just of the lower realms, but a fear of all of samsara, a fear of being reborn into samsara at all. Develop a strong sense of this fear. And now recognize that you are not alone in samsara, but samsara is filled with suffering sentient beings. These sentient beings have been infinitely kind to us over and over again in past lives, as well as in this life. And they are all caught in the web of samsara. They are drowning in this ocean of suffering. And most of them are creating the causes for them to continue suffering again and again. So generate strong compassion for their suffering, develop love to wish them to have happiness, and generate the fear born out of that love and out of that compassion of their suffering in samsara. So that fear is mixed with compassion, with the mind of bodhicitta. It recognizes all of the sufferings of samsara, but instead of focusing on your own place, it focuses on the sufferings of others. Along with that fear for others, generate the wish that you might be totally free from all suffering yourself, that you might develop an omniscient mind so that you might be of maximum benefit to benefit them, to help them be free from samsara. And now, once you have a strong sense of these fears, fears of the lower realms, fears of samsara in general, and fear not just for yourself, but for all sentient beings, contemplate how the three jewels, the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, are appropriate and authentic objects of ultimate refuge. How these three are able to liberate us completely and permanently from all our sufferings by guiding us on the path to Buddhahood. Unlike worldly refuge, these are not simple band-aids. They're not temporary fixes that are dealing with symptoms. But this is the strongest medicine that is dealing with the root cause of our illness. It is the wise doctor diagnosing our illness. And it is the realized community of attendants and nurses guiding us on how to take our medicine. Using this as this metaphor, contemplate how the three jewels are the authentic sources of refuge that will free us from samsara. Only these three are authentic sources of safety from all the dangers of samsara. Contemplate that the Buddha not only is free from all afflicted minds and obscurations, but has perfect love and compassion and has complete impartiality in treating and working for the benefit of all sentient beings. Think of the Dharma jewel, the authentic medicine, has the characteristics of being completely truthful, of teaching the path in a graduated way that meets the needs of the students, that is authentic and verifiable through practice and exploration and analysis, that will not betray us. Think of the characteristics of the Sangha jewel, beings who have perfect practice, beings who understand the nature of reality and they live accordingly, not falling for projections or misunderstandings. Beings who experience the travails of samsara but are not moved by them. They're never steered off course. And in so doing, they become examples and models to help us on our path. Once you are confident in these qualifications of the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, meditate that there is no refuge, no worldly refuge that can meet these same qualifications. There is no suffering being that can lead us out of suffering. It is only these three jewels that is able to lead us to Buddha, that are able to lead us to Buddhahood. So generate the strong conviction that the three jewels have the power to protect and liberate us. And now, lastly, let's take a moment to remember that we have to take refuge in the not only the causal refuge, but the resultant refuge as well. That we have the capacity to become Buddhas. We have the capacity to realize the direct nature of reality. We have the capacity to understand and teach the profound teachings, not just in thought, in word, but also in deed. So that potentiality that exists within our continuum, we also take refuge in our own potential, in our own capacity. And finally, remind yourself of the appropriate ways to live a life that is motivated by these three sources of refuge, which is to say, following the law of karma, recognizing the harm of non-virtuous activity, and striving to engage in virtuous activity, motivated by minds of love and compassion. When the sense of refuge is strong in your continuum, both refuge in the resultant and the causal three jewels, then dedicate in yourself to living a life that follows their example, avoiding non-virtue, adopting virtue. I will live my life in this way. And then, as you feel comfortable, allow your awareness to return to the group, to the screen in front. Thank you so much for joining me in that meditation. So that was very, as usual, on these Sunday mornings, an abbreviated meditation. It's a little over 20 minutes, but you can see how you can go through those steps, right? To really develop that mind of fear and then counter that mind of fear with a commitment to follow the Dharma and the recognition of the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha as the authentic sources of safety and protection from all the fears of samsara for yourself and for others. By making yourself familiar with those, then you don't have to contemplate them as much. They become instinctual. But so as we entered that meditation, I mentioned the way to live your life led by the three jewels, or led by the refuge of the three jewels, is to avoid non-virtue and to practice virtue mixed with the mind of love and compassion, right? And so to do that, we want to model our lives after the lives of bodhisattvas. We want to model our lives after beings who have bodhicitta. And so to do that, we look at the perfected activities of the bodhisattvas, which in this case are the six perfections, or what we're going to talk about for the remaining of the session today, are the six perfected activities of bodhisattvas, right? I think instead of taking a break today, we'll just end a little bit early instead of taking a break. When everyone's online, taking a break just seems to invite, to invite people not to come back. So we often say there are six perfected activities or perfected minds of a bodhisattva. And now we say they're perfected activities because we live these in the world, but really these are types of mind. All six of them are types of mind, right? Sometimes the list is expanded into 10, but we can focus on the six for this purpose. So what are those six? Anyone want to answer?
Yeah. Wisdom, that's the last one, I
Yeah,
think.
that's number 6.
Yeah, sorry. Uh, Generosity,
Yep.
ethical discipline, Shila, Dana,
So,
forbearance.
yep, forbearance, patience,
Yeah, patience. Yeah.
same.
Okay, that's the same. Go on. Sorry. What are the other three?
Fourth one is effort, joyous effort or diligence, and then concentration is the fifth, right? That's okay. Halfway there. So we often say, though, instead of just saying there are six, we say there are actually 36. And what we mean by that is within the practice of the perfection of generosity, all other six are contained. So there's the generosity of generosity, there's the generosity of ethical discipline, the generosity of patience, the generosity of perseverance, the generosity of concentration, and the generosity of wisdom, and so forth. So you can see them subdivided into 36. I won't go through instances of all those. I'm going to keep it general, but just know that this practice doesn't have to be. It isn't like this formal regimentation of boxes. That it's a wide, expansive practice. So, what is generosity? Right? We say generosity is not simply giving things away. It is the mind that wishes to give. That's the importance of generosity. It is a mind that wishes to give, not the act of giving. The act of giving is secondary. The actual practice of generosity is the mind that wishes to give. And there are three types of generosity. The lowest type, or the most accessible type, is the generosity of material goods. So actually giving material goods, that is the perfection of generosity, but is the least profound of the three. The medium type is the generosity of protection, right? This is the generosity of helping others be free from harm. So one way we do this in our tradition is we do animal liberations, where you find animals that are destined to be killed at restaurants for food or as bait for other for hunting and things like this, and then you imbue them with different blessings and set them free. That's one type of the generosity of protection. But in general, anything you do that is wishing to give people safety from harm, whether it be emotional harm or physical harm, that is the generosity of protection. And then the third type and the most profound type of generosity is the generosity of Dharma, right? And so this isn't simply teaching the Dharma, though that is one way we can practice it, but it is living your life according to the Dharma in such a way that you can then be a good influence and role model on others. So you don't have to go around, you know, correcting coworkers with your Dharma knowledge, especially people that aren't interested in it. But when you live your life in such a way that is um, striving for virtue and is filled with compassion, then others can see that and they want to follow that example naturally. And that is itself a type of generosity, the wish to give Dharma to others in whatever ways are possible to you, right? So that does involve some skill, some wisdom, some um, skillful means that you're not just shouting Dharma verses, but you are giving the Dharma in ways that it will be received well to others. So there's three types of generosity: material, protection, and Dharma are all minds wanting to give. That's the important thing. Because the act of actually giving is less important than the mind that motivates it. And true generosity gives without any sort of expectation, right? That is critical. If you give expecting something in response, then that's not the action of generosity. It may be appreciated, it may be helpful, but it's not generosity. I've seen great examples of this in sometimes when a big lama, whether it be Lama Zopa or any important lama is visiting, there'll be a line of audience to come greet him, right? And they often have gifts. And I've seen the case where one person gave the lama some sort of present, whether it be nice chocolate or um, I've seen once someone give them a watch. I've heard a story about. I've seen someone gave them a beautiful painting that was a verse from the Bodhisattva Charyavatara that had been really done beautifully in calligraphy. And then the teacher takes that gift and gives it to the next person in line, right? Because they don't have any need for these things. And you see the person that gave it, they get so upset. They said, "No, I gave that to the Lama. That was, my offering to the Lama." And he said, "Well, it was clearly not an act of generosity because you had so many expectations tied up with your act of giving." right? That you didn't give it freely. You gave it and you were still clinging to it after you let it go. So that's not pure generosity. It's a good attempt at generosity, right? But it's not actual generosity. Actual generosity expects nothing in return and has no fear of loss. There's no fear that my life will be worse off because of giving this away, whatever it may be. So, if especially we're trying to practice the generosity of material goods, because that is useful, we should start by giving away trivial things and small things. Because if we give them away and then regret giving them away, then that is a harmful mind, right? When we regret engaging in virtue, that regret becomes harmful. Regret is one of those minds that is considered changeable. When you regret engaging in non virtue, then that regret is virtuous. But when you regret engaging in virtue, that regret is non virtuous. So it's called changeable in that way because it depends upon the object, right? So if you give away something and regret it, regardless of who you give it away to, then you're just creating more non-virtue for yourself. So start by giving away trivial things. For instance, whenever I whenever I loan a book to someone, I loan it expecting not to give it back. And that way, when other people uh, don't give it back, I don't feel a loss from it. I don't feel upset that I gave it away. And so if there's something that I know I don't want to give away, then I won't loan it to someone in that way, right? So you start with things that you feel comfortable giving away and you won't feel regret over losing them. And then, depending on your circumstances, you see what's appropriate. Not all of us are in the same circumstance, because it's the most important thing is the mind that wants to give. It's not the object that you give. So there's often the parable, I think even in other religions as well, is that a beggar who gives a very small amount of money as an offering accumulates more merit than an incredibly rich person who gives an offering that is hundreds of times more, because the beggar's motivation is so much more profound and their intention is so much more profound that the amount they give is of no consequence. So it's the same way, like this. So generosity, the reason we practice generosity, it not only does it benefit others, but it also helps us diminish our attachment to material goods, and it helps us turn away the self-cherishing mind that is focused on only our own happiness. When we're giving protection and when we're giving Dharma, especially, that is putting our attention on others' happiness, right? Not our own happiness. And so the act of giving, it helps sever us from our own attachment, from our clinging nature, and it promotes our focusing on mind that cherishes others more than ourselves. Now, following generosity is the perfection of, we sometimes say, morality or ethical discipline. And again, there are three types of ethical discipline we talk about. The first one is refraining, the ethical discipline of restraint or refraining from engaging in harmful activity. That's one type of ethical discipline, right? And that's the one we think of most readily, that we don't engage in harmful activity. But then there's the ethical discipline of gathering virtue, and that is the ethical discipline of practicing virtuous activity. That is also a type of ethical discipline, right? Which is why when you look in the different sets of vows, both the vows of individual liberation, the Bodhisattva vows, and Tantra vows, some of those vows are proscriptive. They say, don't do such and such, but other vows are prescriptive. They say you should do such and such, right? And as we talked about when taking refuge, the commitments, some of them are proscriptive and some are prescriptive. So those are two different types of morality. One is restraining from harmful action, and that's called the morality of restraint or resolve sometimes. And then the other is the morality of gathering virtue, which is engaging in virtuous activity. And then the last one is the morality of working for the welfare of sentient beings. So that is um, both of the previous types of morality that are infused with a mind of bodhicitta and compassion. So morality isn't simply following the rules, right? It's the mind that wishes to never engage in non-virtue, and the mind that wishes to accumulate virtue, and the mind that wishes to do both of those things so it can be of benefit to others. So when we talk about renunciation, right, which is a topic we often talk about, especially as we want to renounce the suffering of samsara, that is a type of ethical discipline, a type of morality. In fact, renunciation is like the very heart of morality. When you have a genuine understanding of samsara and you want to be free from it, then morality is the next logical step, right? When you understand the law of cause and effect, which is causing suffering in samsara, then your next logical step is to avoid non-virtuous behavior. Now, Atisha said that the best kind of ethical discipline, the strongest type of morality, is a mind at peace, right? Having a peaceful mind serves as the basis for you to engage in virtue more readily and to avoid non-virtue. So no matter the circumstances around you, being able to have a peaceful mind, that is the lifeblood of your morality. If your mind is constantly disrupted by whatever circumstances there are, whether they be people causing you harm or winning the lottery, if your mind can't stay steady, then you're not going to have a moral behavior following those disruptions, right? So that's why Atisha said the best kind of discipline is a mind that is at peace. Now, Potoa, Geshe Potoa, who is a few generations after Atisha, said, the root of all discipline comes down to following a spiritual friend. And that's not contradicting Atisha, but it's showing us that if we want to develop that mind of peace, which then allows us to engage with virtue and non-virtue in a meaningful and intentional way, having a spiritual teacher or a guide is incredibly important because they are what are not simply showing us the path, but they're modeling the path. And if we want to think of the importance of morality, we can just think of how difficult it is to achieve even our own personal worldly goals if you don't have some kind of strict discipline, right? Some strict ethical discipline. If you're just doing whatever you want and you're not following any kind of rule or regulation, even achieving your own goals in this life becomes very difficult. So if we don't have a strong sense of morality, how can we ever help to be a benefit to others if we're not able to control ourselves in that way? So that is the perfection of morality or ethical discipline. If you want to read more examples of it in the Bodhicharya Vitara, the Way of the Bodhisattva by Shantideva, the chapter on carefulness and introspection talks about the practice of morality. You know, we call these perfections. That's the English translation. In Sanskrit, it is paramita, which is translated as parotuchimpa in Tibetan. And both paramita and parotuchimpa give a sense of movement. So the actual etymology of the Tibetan, paro is like far distance, and tuchimpa means to go a far distance, to cross a far distance, right? And so to go to the far shore of samsara, where enlightenment lies. That's what it means to be perfected, to cross the ocean and go to the far distance to achieve something that is beyond samsara, right? So paro tu chimpa, to go to the far shore, to traverse a great distance. And paramita, it has a similar connotation. So we call them perfections because they are something that is not a simple act that is found within samsara, but it is to the far edge of samsara and pulling us out of samsara. Now, after generosity and morality, we have the perfection of patience or forbearance. And this also comes in three types. The first is not being offended at others who cause you harm. So when you experience harm from others, directly or indirectly, not allowing your mind to be unsettled by that harm is the practice of patience. And then, very similar to that, the second one is joyfully accepting suffering when it comes. Now, this does not mean seeking out suffering, right? This isn't glorifying suffering as being a good thing, but it's recognizing that suffering, whether it comes from the hands of another sentient being or due to our circumstance or due to, our clumsiness and tripping over a table, whatever it may be, suffering is going to happen because we're samsaric beings, right? So accepting that suffering joyfully
in realizing that every moment of suffering, especially that coarse kind of suffering that we experience in this life, is a result of negative karma. And by experiencing that negative karma now, we won't experience it in the future. So that karma is being exhausted, right? And it's being exhausted at a time when we have the capacity to deal with it. Because think that same karmic seed could take fruit at a time when we don't have these same resources, when we have less opportunity to deal with it in a healthy way. So by experiencing that harmful karma ripening now at a time when we have resources to navigate it, that is a good thing. So we look at that karma being exhausted and know it can't ripen again. Right? So that is developing a mind that joyfully accepts suffering when it comes. It doesn't seek out suffering, but it recognizes that suffering is at least exhausting harmful karma and doesn't get upset by it. Teachers like Atisha used to be happy when they were criticized because they didn't have any opportunity to practice patience unless they had people criticizing them, right? Because they'd already achieved such levels of calm in their mind that they didn't naturally feel suffering the way other less realized beings did. So it was only when people criticized them that they said, "Oh, thank you so much. Now I have an opportunity to practice patience." You know. So that's the second type, and then the third type of patience is um, remaining interested in developing certainty regarding the Dharma. So this is an interesting one, and it happens that a lot of people have been studying and they feel like they're studying the same things over and over again, or they feel like they're not making any progress in their practice, no matter how much they strive in it, and they become disheartened, right? And they feel like maybe this isn't useful, or maybe the Dharma, even if I believe in it, there's no point in me trying because I'm not making any progress. So they lose any interest in developing confidence in the Dharma. So maintaining your interest in the Dharma and your confidence that the Dharma is an accurate representation of how to be free from suffering, that is a type of patience. Now, many times, patience is considered the most supreme of the six, and that's because patience is the exact opposite and antidote for anger. And anger is the most destructive negative emotion we have, right? Anger is always non-virtuous. You know, we talk about the three root poisons of anger, attachment, and ignorance or delusion. Ignorance, as well as attachment, can be neutral. They're not necessarily non-virtuous. It's possible for attachment and ignorance to be neutral, right? But anger is always non-virtuous. It's never neutral, and it's clearly never virtuous. So to have a direct antidote to that is incredibly powerful because a mind of anger can eliminate the potential for so many of your karmic actions to ripen. So it's impossible to have a mind of patience manifest in your continuum simultaneously with a mind of anger because they're direct opposites of each other, right? You can have them not manifest, right? You can have a mind of patience that we say is latent and anger manifest. Like you have both of them at the same time in that way. But to have them both manifest simultaneously is impossible. So if you're always cultivating a mind of patience, it's not giving any space for anger to break through. So it's considered the supreme among austerities and an essential practice. It's important to remember that patience is not indifference, um, and it's not the mere absence of anger, like when someone harms you. The mere absence of anger or indifference to that harm is not patience. It is gratitude at the opportunity to practice, right? It's gratitude that you can put your dharma into effect. So in that way, similar to all the other things we talk about, it's active, you know. Um, maybe we'll go quickly. The fourth is joyous effort, or sometimes called diligence or perseverance. Again, this has three types. The first one is it's called armor-like um, diligence, and this is being joyfully courageous in your practice in the face of difficulty, right? So when things are going difficult, instead of looking at those and being defeated by them, looking at those obstacles as opportunities to grow, and then committing yourself to your practice, regardless of what difficulties arise as a result, that is armor-like joyous effort. It is the resolve that no matter what difficulties I experience, I'm still going to practice Dharma. And I'm going to let the Dharma motivate me and guide me through whatever minefields come up. That's armor-like perseverance. And the second one is the perseverance in gathering virtue. So it is the realization that not only are we engaging in actions that avoid non-virtue, but we are leaning into virtuous activity. And then the last one is the perseverance that works for the benefit of sentient beings. So it's similar to morality in that way, where the second two work together, of gathering virtue and of benefiting sentient beings. And you can see how perseverance kind of amplifies our other perfections. By having that perseverance, then your practice doesn't weaken. Your practice stays strong. The essence of perseverance or diligence is being delighted when you focus on an object of virtue. And in that way, it's strongly correlated to the mind of rejoicing, right? They're not the same thing, but rejoicing is finding happiness and joy in virtue and finding happiness and joy in others' happiness, right? That's what minds of rejoicing are. And they predispose you to lead into virtue. And so while it's not the same thing as joyous effort or as perseverance, rejoicing and perseverance go together because they're both pointing at virtue and finding joy in that, right? The Kadamba Geshe say that in someone that lacks perseverance, no good qualities will ever emerge because good qualities don't come from their own accord, right? They come from effort. They come from doing the work, you know? You can speak all of the Dharma to, to an animal all day long, 24 hours a day, but they're never going to achieve good qualities because they don't practice. Like the words don't mean anything to them. They don't exert effort at understanding, at contemplating, and at meditating. So that's what we have to do. We recognize that we have that opportunity. And so that diligence, that perseverance is what pushes our practice forward and allows us to achieve some sort of realization. And importantly, perseverance is the direct antidote to laziness. And laziness, I think, is really important to talk about because there are three types of laziness. The first one is what we think of when we think of laziness, and that is just like not motivated to engage in any activity, right? Of being, they call it the laziness of indolence, is how it's defined. But just, procrastinating and like this. But then the second type of laziness is they call the laziness of inadequacy. And this is not engaging in virtuous activities because you believe that you aren't good enough to do them. Saying, I'm not strong enough to meditate every day, so I won't do it. Or I'm not smart enough to study this text, so I'm not going to bother. Right? So putting yourself down and saying, I'm not good enough to do this virtuous activity, this Dharma activity, so I'm going to avoid it. That is a type of laziness, we say. That kind of self-deprecation, right? Especially when it's self-deprecation with regard to some sort of virtuous activity. That's a type of laziness. And so it's diligence and joyous effort that can help burn through that laziness. And the last type of laziness is actually the opposite of laziness. It's a willingness to engage in activity that is non-dharma or harmful activity, right? We call that a laziness because it is preventing us from engaging in dharma, right? You can see how it's the opposite of diligence. So having a strong attraction to engaging in harmful activity or a strong attraction engaging in non-dharma activity is itself a type of laziness because it is procrastinating our virtuous practice. It is procrastinating our dharma practice. So those three types of laziness all are uprooted and prevented by having a mind of diligence, a mind of perseverance. If we think how much effort we put into achieving our worldly goals, right? Think if you have an exam coming up, how much effort you put into preparing for that exam. Or if you have a promotion you want, how much effort you put in to achieving that promotion. Or if there is someone you're attracted to, how much effort you put into wooing them, to courting them, right? To getting them to like develop a relationship with you. How much effort, how much money you spend, how much time you spend, all these things you do to achieve some worldly end. Now, if we applied even a modicum of that effort to our Dharma practice, think of how fast our Dharma practice would increase, right? So we can think of all the effort we put towards worldly ends and realize that we're putting so much effort into samsara that it's time we put effort into liberation, right? And that is what the practice of joyous effort does. And now the last two are concentration and wisdom. So concentration, in general, when we talk about concentration, we divide it by, uh-oh, I think my puppies are getting a bit, excuse me, 1 second. Apologize. There are puppies outside, and my puppies cannot resist when there are puppies outside. They're good at breaking my concentration, as it were. The perfection of concentration, we often define it by its results. So the concentration that brings about calm abiding, right? The blissful pliancy in this life. That's one type of concentration. There's the concentration that brings about what we call worldly cities, and that is concentration on the more subtle types of phenomena. And then there's concentration for the benefit of all sentient beings. So the divisions aren't so useful with concentration, but they all contain the same essence, right? Is the recognition that we need to engage in concentration if we hope to develop our Dharma knowledge. And if we don't actually have Dharma knowledge, then it's hard to put Dharma into practice, right? And so we can look at our minds and how easy it is to be distracted and realize that as long as our minds are distracted, no matter how much effort we put into something, we're not going to achieve what we want because we keep getting distracted. And so concentration helps us avoid those distractions and actually do what we want with our lives, right? So in that way, concentration is necessary to lead a meaningful life. Geshe Potwa says that among people, there are many pleasures and lots of things to do, and therefore virtuous practice does not happen. Therefore, too, meditative concentration will not occur. So what he's saying is we surround ourselves with so many worldly activities that we lose sight of what it means to practice virtue, and we lose sight of what it means to focus on our mind. Because we look towards worldly happiness and we look towards worldly distraction instead of looking inward. But if we don't have a strong sense of concentration, it's very difficult to develop a mind of morality. It's very difficult to develop conviction in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. It's very difficult to develop conviction in any of the teachings because we're constantly distracted, right? We often talk about the need for hearing, contemplating, and meditating. These are all combined with this idea of perfection of concentration. So if we hope to destroy our afflicted minds, we need to have a mind that we can control. Like that is the most critical thing. If we can't control our mind, then what's the hope of overcoming our negative minds if we have no control of it? And the way we control it is through concentration. You know, it's for this reason that even calm abiding meditation, right, which is the first meditation we teach, following your breath, is so profound and so revolutionary in our everyday life because we're used to living without actual control of our minds. We're used to living being led around by our distractions like a ring through the nose of a bull, right? And we don't even realize we're being led around by our distractions. So even developing a small bit of concentration on using a meditation that's just focusing on the breath can totally change your life in this life. So it seems simple, and it's a practice that many other religious traditions have some version of, right? Contemplative meditation and mindfulness meditation doesn't exist only in Buddhist practice, but it is critically important if you hope to engage in any kind of intentional activity in this life. And then lastly, the last perfection is the perfection of wisdom. And so ultimately, there is the wisdom that realizes conventional reality and the wisdom that realizes ultimate reality. So conventional reality, or the conventional truth as we call it, is everything that is not emptiness, right? And emptiness is the ultimate reality, the ultimate nature of all phenomena to not exist in the way they appear to us, but to exist by means of mere imputation, by conceptual thought. That is how phenomena really exist. That's the ultimate nature of all phenomena. And that's the ultimate truth of all phenomena. That they exist, but they don't exist inherently. They don't exist from their own side. They exist as a result of our projections. The conventional nature is the way we perceive them and the way we engage with them. So wisdom, we have wisdom that realizes conventional nature and conventional truth, and then wisdom that realizes ultimate truth. And we need both, right? Until, in order to develop the mind that realizes the nature of reality and that wisdom, we have to be able to realize how things appear to us and engage with them in a worldly level. If we insist that we are constantly focusing on the ultimate truth, then we ignore the truth of what's in front of us, right? This is how we often say that. So wisdom needs to be skillful. So you need to apply wisdom to your other activities. They often say that the first 5 perfections are like a group of blind folks wandering around the edge of a cliff. It's wisdom that serves as their guide, that keeps them safe and points them in the right direction. Right? So you need wisdom to point your activities in the right direction. Wisdom, both conventional and ultimate wisdom, are what ensure us that our activities are aligned with the teachings of the Dharma, and they prevent us from like straying off the path. And so it's this reason that study is so important, right? Because it's not just ultimate wisdom. We need to focus on conventional wisdom as well. So studying the Dharma is important. And then using that study as an opportunity to contemplate the Dharma is important. The Kadamba Geshe Puchua would say, what is the point of saying you practice the Dharma if you don't actually know the Dharma? So we need to study so we know the Dharma. And by knowing it, then we can be skillful in the way we apply all of the other practices of perfections. The way we apply our compassion. There are some people who are greatly compassionate by nature due to their imprints from past lives, but they don't know how to use that compassion. So they do things in a frivolous way that they think is helping others, but is really just being wasteful or not really helping, right? Because they're not applying wisdom to their compassion. So we need to develop wisdom through our study of the teachings and then apply that wisdom to our compassion and to the other perfections to guide them in the right direction towards Buddhahood. Maybe I will pause there and see, do we have any other questions? I know we're going to end a little early today. I could talk a little more, but I thought first I'd see if there are any questions. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, Venerable Lecton. So I was wondering about wisdom, practice of wisdom alongside the other perfections being critical. So just a hypothetical situation, for example, if I were to give, for example, a piece of chocolate to a small child who I know wouldn't brush his teeth properly, would you call that unwise? Although I'm practicing generosity, I know that the child will enjoy the sweet, but is that an example of something that's unwise?
Well, you could say in that example, wisdom would be practicing the generosity of giving that chocolate while simultaneously teaching the child the importance of brushing their teeth, right? So wisdom wouldn't be cutting off the generosity, it would be modifying it. Whereas opposed to giving chocolate to a dog, which we know can kill a dog, right? Because of the chemicals in chocolate, the bromides. So having the wish to give this dog some food, but all you have is chocolate, the wisdom knowing not to give in that case, that is wisdom in where you prevent the physical act of giving. But with a child, it doesn't mean not giving necessarily, but it means doing it in a skillful way, right? So that might be encouraging them to brush their teeth or whatever it may be. But yeah, that's not giving blindly, right? It's not just giving something away and saying, well, since I'm giving, it's beneficial. Right. So that is an example of how you bring in wisdom to make sure that your act of generosity is lined up with both worldly and spiritual concerns in a meaningful way. It's also wisdom is like, if um, like say this is like an extreme example. They give this example in some of the stories, and it always is silly to me because I don't know how anyone would be in the circumstance. But say someone comes to you and says like, I really need a good knife, and you know they're going to use that knife to go kill someone or to kill an animal or to commit a sacrifice, then it wouldn't be an act of wise generosity to give them a knife, because you know they're going to use it to engage in harmful action. I don't really know when anyone's going to run up to you and be like, hey, I need a knife. But if that were to happen, wisdom would be the way to temper, right? So in that way, wisdom guides your other actions. And notice that's worldly wisdom, right? That's not necessarily spiritual wisdom. So that's recognizing that wisdom of the conventional truth, wisdom of the world you live in, is also necessary. Wisdom understanding the true nature of reality is what helps you get rid of your afflicted minds, right? Because understanding emptiness is the only true antidote to overcoming all of your obscurations and afflictions. But we have to live in the world. As long as we're living in the world, we also need worldly wisdom. We need conventional wisdom, right? Because that is going to help guide all of our other behaviors. So we need both. Does that help?
Yeah, thanks.
I have a question. Let's say I'm like really distressed and I don't want to like take refuge in like, let's say, looking at my phone or binge watching a series. Like, how do I go about taking refuge in the Dharma? Like, do you have like any steps that I can follow? Because if I make it a practice, then maybe I'll get better.
So sweet.
Well, the first thing you want to do, right? The first thing you do is recognize that whatever, let's say binge watching a Netflix show. Let's say that is what you're looking at as your source of refuge. The first thing you want to do is recognize that that is not actually a source of refuge, right? So it doesn't mean don't do it, but know that I'm distressed right now, and I know watching this comfort show will calm me down. So you can say that in a very immediate worldly sense, what I'm doing is taking care of my immediate needs, but I'm recognizing this is not solving my deeper needs, right? So that's the first step. Well, actually, no, that's not true. The first step is realizing that you have an impulse to go towards a worldly refuge in the first place, to realize that when I'm distressed, I'm doing this, because we do so many things without realizing it, right? We do these actions instinctually. So the first step of your practice is developing that recognition, which you do through study and contemplation. So then once you have the recognition, then the next step is to say, okay, instead of watching this Netflix show as a way to find happiness, I'm recognizing this isn't a real refuge. I'm still going to do it, but I recognize it's only dealing with my immediate circumstances. And then once your mind has calmed down and it isn't in extreme distress, then maybe you can engage in just a type of calm abiding meditation, which will help you then, now that you've gotten rid of the most egregious harmful circumstances, then you can try to point your mind in another direction. So that's like the intermediate step. And then the third step, once you've done that and you've gotten more comfortable in that, then the next step would be when you have that impulse to then say, instead of going to watch Netflix right now, first I'm going to meditate. First, I'm going to see if I can just spend 15, 20 minutes focusing on my breath, developing a mind of compassion, or depending on what the circumstances were, like what it was that caused you distress, try to practice a meditation that's focusing on the antidote to that distress, right? Depending on what it is. So do meditation first. And then after those 15, 20 minutes of meditation, see, okay, now do I still want to go binge Netflix? And because the Netflix is still there, right? Like that is still an opportunity available to me. I haven't cut it off. So gradually, right? It's a gradual process. But so the first thing is recognizing that you're seeking out, worldly items as if they were a source of happiness and allowing yourself to be disinterested in that. Then the second one is not immediately cutting yourself off cold turkey, but just accepting that this is not going to make me happy, but it's going to change my external circumstances to give me a calmer mind. And then the third step is trying to use meditation before you engage in those worldly activities. Does that help? That's like a graduated process.
Yeah.
We titrate ourselves away from samsara.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah. Anything else? Deepti, do you have a question? You are muted at the moment.
Can you hear me now? I'm sorry, I'm a big mess.
I can hear you.
How can I bear with ongoing problems, being denied water, being denied food, insults, blocks, on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to say too many personal things. I have a lawsuit, I've come to the end of it. And I've crossed swords with some very powerful man, unknowingly, not directly, but it happened indirectly. So how can I overcome? Also, I can sense witchcraft for many years on my house and on myself. I don't want to lose my mind and focus because this is the last stage of the lawsuit. It's my food and my deathbed, Even my cremation funds, I have to make arrangements on my own. I have no relatives who are helpful. I mean, there are some, but they're very, very wealthy. So how can I maintain myself being denied all this? Wherever I go, they're abusive, blocking, insulting.
I see. So
it's a very powerful group of men.
Yeah, I'm sure. It sounds like it. The important thing is to
Yes.
recognize that as we're developing patience, patience is the mind that is not letting itself be disturbed by harm. And so
Correct.
when you have a lot of difficult circumstances at once, it's hard to practice patience because you feel like it's coming.
Yes, that's no
So you
problem.
focus on an individual thing and focus
Of
on small.
course.
Because first, you have to build up your patience with regard to small things. So even
Mhm.
if you don't think of the difficult circumstances that are coming to you from outside, but think of other
Right.
opportunities or experiences in your life, in your daily life that cause distress, and try to develop patience towards those. A mind that says, this is the result of actions I've done in the past, in past lives, right? That this distress in this moment is the ripening of negative karma I created in past lives.
No, I don't accept that. I don't accept. There's a
I,
very powerful gang here.
that's how karma works.
Many women
You
are
experience
beaten to
suffering.
death.
I appreciate that, but we say,
Yeah.
that as we spoken just yesterday, we were talking.
Earlier. Yeah.
Well, I know you weren't in the class yesterday, but there was a different class. But
Oh, I
karma,
don't know.
one of the results of karma, that's not your fault. I'm not blaming you. I'm just saying one of the results
Of
of karma
course.
is the result that is similar in the effect as the cause. So when you engage in harmful actions in this life, the result is you've created the seed to have those actions happen to you. So when you
Correct.
engage in, let's say, the act of beating someone up or acting violently towards them, the result of that is in a future life, people will abuse you
They
in the
can
same
beat
way,
you.
right?
Correct.
So as a result, what
But
that means,
I'm noticing this gang is so rich and so powerful with black magic. Nothing happens to them.
not in this life. Nothing happens to them in this life, but they're creating the causes for them to experience suffering in the future. They may not experience it in this life, right? That's how karma works across lifetimes. Nothing. That's why bad things happen to good people all the time, and good things
Yes, correct.
happen to bad
Yeah.
because they created the
I got
cause
that.
past, right? But
I
regardless,
agree.
even if you aren't confident in karma, that's okay. What we can do is, when you experience distress, you have to combine
Is
your.
there a mantra you can give or?
There's no magic mantra, unfortunately. It's practice. If there was a magic mantra, none of us would be experiencing distress. What you can do, I mean, what mantras are helpful? A mantra is focused on compassion. So the mantra of of Avalokiteshvara is incredibly, incredibly powerful.
Oh, so good.
Right? Because what that's doing is it's creating a space of compassion in your mind. So when you
Of
experience
course.
harm,
Pain.
instead of harm, pain, difficult circumstances, those are legitimate, right? So it's not saying these aren't real.
Yes.
This is not saying like
I can show you proof. I can show you proof.
no. I believe what I'm saying is
Of
the
course.
mind of compassion, excuse me, the mind of patience is not
Mm-hmm.
denying that you're experiencing difficult circumstances, but it's just recognizing that those
How
difficult circumstances do not have to affect your mind. Even if they affect your body, even if they affect your livelihood, your mind is yours to control, right? So it's not denying the truth of those circumstances, but it's saying, I still have control of my mind. And so I'm going to face these one at a time and not let my mind be disturbed, even as these very real harms are happening to me. So that's the first thing. And then you combine that with wisdom because the wisdom says, are there things I can do in my life to help ameliorate the harm or prevent the harm? And maybe there are, maybe there aren't, right? Depending on how powerful these other forces are. Maybe there aren't more external things you can do. But that's how wisdom is helping your patience. So the patience isn't just saying, everyone come beat me up all the time and I'm just going to take it and I'm not going to care about it. Patience is saying, no matter what harm comes to me, I am not going to let my mind be upset by that harm. And I'm going to find that harm as an opportunity to commit myself to practicing the Dharma and to generating compassion response to harm. So that is protecting
I
your mind.
feel on some level, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can
On
hear you.
some level, they want me to react in a bad sort of way to destroy my spiritual life. I feel like that. Do you agree? Do you think it's
Oh,
possible?
I mean, I don't know about your circumstance, but definitely
Of
many
course,
people,
of
when they
course.
engage in harmful actions towards you, they do it because they expect you to self-implode and to create more problems for yourself. And that's what
That's
patience
right.
prevents you
That
from.
is my wisdom. Yes, yes, I can feel it.
So I hope that is helpful a little bit. I know I can't speak to your exact circumstance, but patience is not it's not denying, it's not saying this isn't real, and it is not denying that it's genuine suffering, that it makes your life difficult. But what it's doing is saying that even when I experience physical discomfort and suffering at the hands of others, I don't have to let that affect my mind. So patience is protecting your own mind and your own virtue and your own happiness in that way.
Oh,
And recognizing that your happiness comes from within. It doesn't come from outside.
good. That's from outside.
So, and then if you want, I mean, a mantra that is helpful, I say for everything, and the Dalai Lama
Sure.
says, is that the mantra of compassion, Om Mani Padme Hum, is this most simple mantra,
Of
but it
course.
embodies pure
Oh,
compassion. And if you can generate
so
even
beautiful.
a small mind of compassion toward the people that are harming you, that's really
Of
powerful.
course.
If you recognize that when they engage in these harmful actions, all they're doing is harming themselves. Not now, but
Good.
in the future.
It's
Then you
later.
bring compassion towards them. That can help as well.
And I was beaten up by a man on my lane who I don't even know during the day. And he said, "You're a Gandhian family and Christ lover. So enjoy the pain I give you." What would I do then? Hmm.
You know, you have to, there's not much you can
Just
do.
keep quiet. Nothing can be done.
Quiet.
I'm powerless. I'm
If you're
powerless.
protect yourself, then you protect yourself. If you're in a circumstance to
That's
report that person in a meaningful way, authorities, then do that. And if you're not, then you have to recognize what tools do you have. And if you don't have any tools at the moment to
the
help you in
problem.
an internal way, then you have to focus on the internal because the internal you always have the tools to do, right?
Yes.
And then if you have external tools, then use them. But if you don't, then you focus only on the internal. And you have to find that balance as best.
No, they're very powerful. I have no legal rights, human rights. I have no rights.
Yeah, I'm very sorry for your circumstance. There's not, Buddhism is looking at how you control your mind in those circumstances, unfortunately.
I like that because everything starts from there for me now. If I can maintain my mental peace, then it's possible I can overcome this in a few months, a few years, if I live that long.
I mean, that's the hope, right? The inner peace and the inner
It's
calm is
very
what
important.
we're developing.
Very important. That is the last citadel to fall.
So I
Thank you, Reverend.
yes, thank you. I think that's a good place to end.
So sweet.
I hear some there are power tools powering up in the background behind me. So I think that's my sign that it is a good time to move on. So I appreciate all of the questions and I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. So let's take a moment. We began our practice today with setting a strong intention that made our practice virtuous in the beginning. And then we engaged in Dharma study and contemplation that made our practice virtuous in the middle. And now let us dedicate our merit. So we recognize that by discussing the Dharma, contemplating it, we have accumulated some virtue, some positive karma. And instead of keeping that for ourselves, let us generate the wish that we can give that virtue to other sentient beings, that it may ripen on them, that they might experience happiness and joy and freedom from suffering. And by engaging in this act of dedication, we make our practice virtuous at the end as well. So it becomes virtuous in the 3 times. And so to kind of solidify those minds of dedication, we will recite some prayers together. There's some very brief dedication prayers. So we'll recite the first one first in Tibetan once, and then in English, and then the next 2 in English. Jean Choe Sem Choe Rinpoche Ma Kye Panam Ke Gyu Ching Kye Wa Nyam Pa Me Pa Yang Gon E Gon De Pe Wa Cho. May the supreme jewel of bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow. May that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good, all-powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso. Please remain until samsara ends. Savior of the snowland teachings and transmigratory beings who makes extremely clear the path that is unification of emptiness and compassion. To the lotus holder, Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. May the glorious Guru's lives be long and stable. May all beings equaling the extent of space have happiness. May I and all others without exception accumulate merit and purify negativities, and may we be blessed to quickly attain Buddhahood. Thank you so much.